Chapter 1. The Unexpected Proposal. I had spent most of my life as a soldier, a member of the Galactic Defense Corps, trained to fight wars and ensure the safety of Earth and its colonies across the galaxy. What they don't tell you when you sign up is that most of the time, the wars don't come. Instead, you're assigned to peacekeeping, a job that often brings you face to face with other species, sometimes friendly, sometimes not, but always dangerous in their own way. The creatures you meet, the worlds you travel to, the endless unknowns that stretch across the cosmos, they become a part of you. And then there are the missions that change everything. The missions where you find yourself in situations that even the most battle-hardened veterans can't quite predict. That's where I was when I first encountered Princess Terran. It started out like any other diplomatic mission, a simple request from the Zilthar Empire, a powerful and ancient race known for their advanced technologies and their uniquely rich culture. The Zilthar had requested an escort to a neutral planet, Azura 9, where a peace summit was to be held between them and several other galactic powers. Tensions had been rising in the galaxy for months, and all sides were eager to avoid an all-out war, but none more so than the Zilthar. As Earth's liaison officer, I was assigned to the security detail for their royal delegation, an honor most officers would have relished. At first, I thought this was just another job, another day in the life of a soldier. Sure, the Zilthar were known to be proud, and their royal family held a certain mystique, but I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I had no way of knowing that the moment I laid eyes on Princess Terran would be the moment everything in my life would change forever. We landed on Azura 9 under the cover of night. The planet was stunning, a deep blue and green world covered in vast oceans and thick forests, with towering mountain ranges that stretched into the sky like jagged teeth. The atmosphere was breathable, the gravity similar to Earth's, and the cities were full of life, futuristic yet harmonious with nature. It was a world that had been at peace for centuries, a perfect neutral ground for intergalactic diplomacy. The Zilthar delegation arrived in a sleek, obsidian ship that seemed to shimmer as if made from a living material. The beauty and elegance of the craft reflected the dignity and power of the Zilthar people themselves. The moment I stepped onto the tarmac to meet them, I could feel the weight of their history, of their traditions, pressing down on me. Princess Terran was the crown jewel of the delegation, the firstborn daughter of the Zilthar Emperor, and the one chosen to represent their empire at the Peace Summit. She was unlike any ruler I had ever met. Tall, regal, with pale lavender skin that seemed to glow faintly in the light of the twin moons, her dark eyes held a wisdom that felt both ancient and far too young. Her hair, long and silver, cascaded around her shoulders like liquid starlight. She wore an intricately designed gown, flowing and luxurious, with silver thread woven into patterns that seemed to move with her every step, as if the fabric itself was alive. There was an undeniable aura of authority around her, yet, beneath it all, there was something vulnerable, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The first time our eyes met, there was a strange moment of connection. It was brief, but it lingered long after. She was a royal, accustomed to power and respect, yet in that fleeting second, I could see something else in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe even uncertainty, as if she was just as unfamiliar with me as I was with her. Sergeant Carter, her voice rang out across the landing pad, clear and commanding, yet with an undertone of grace. It is an honor to meet you. I trust you will keep us safe while we are here. I snapped to attention, giving the formal salute I had been trained to give when greeting someone of royal status, but I couldn't help feeling slightly awkward under her gaze. Your Highness, it's my duty and my privilege to escort you and your delegation during your stay on Azura 9. You have my word that we will provide all necessary protection. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, and I realized with a jolt that she was reading me. Not just with her eyes, but something deeper, something that made the air feel charged around us. It was unsettling, but not in a threatening way. More like she was trying to figure me out. I've heard a lot about humans, she said, her voice soft but piercing, but nothing quite prepares you for meeting one in person. I nodded, unsure how to respond, but I smiled as I motioned for her to follow me toward the waiting transport. We're a lot more than stories, Your Highness, I said, trying to keep the conversation light. You'll see soon enough. The rest of the night passed in a blur as we made our way through the bustling streets of Azura 9's capital. Security was tight, and I was on high alert, watching every movement, scanning for potential threats. The Zilthar delegation kept to themselves mostly, the princess being the focal point of most conversations, though I couldn't help but notice the subtle tension that seemed to cling to her. It wasn't just the responsibility of her role or the impending peace talks. There was something more personal in the way she held herself, something deep that seemed to reflect a quiet battle within her. The next day, the peace summit began. But instead of focusing on the negotiations, I found myself constantly drawn back to Princess Terran. There was something about her that intrigued me, a calm, yet tumultuous energy that seemed to pull at me. She was a ruler, yes, but she was also a young woman, burdened by her lineage and the future of her people. I couldn't quite grasp it, but I felt like I was witnessing the weight of an entire galaxy pressing on her shoulders. It wasn't until the second evening of the summit that things started to shift. The discussions had been long and tense, but as the formalities wound down, we found ourselves at a banquet hall celebrating the small steps toward peace. The mood had lightened slightly, and for the first time, I saw the princess not as a political figure, but as a person. We had exchanged words in passing, but I never expected what happened next. As the evening wore on, I was pulled into a conversation with several of the other military officials, discussing strategy and potential future missions. But then, I felt a soft, almost imperceptible touch on my shoulder. I turned to find Princess Terran standing behind me, her face as composed as ever, but there was something in her eyes, something different, something unexpected. "Sergeant Carter," she began, her voice quieter than before and far more intimate. "Would you walk with me? I find the night air refreshing." I blinked in surprise, but without thinking, I nodded. "Of course, Your Highness." We stepped outside onto the balcony that overlooked the sprawling city, the distant stars twinkling above us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was something strangely serene about the silence, something that felt almost personal. I was acutely aware of her presence, aware of the way the soft breeze played with her silver hair, the way her gaze lingered on the stars. And then, she spoke. "You must think me strange," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I know I carry the weight of my people's future, but sometimes I feel so very alone in it." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't some diplomat, some counselor. I was just a soldier. But something about her honesty, the vulnerability that flickered in her voice, struck a chord with me. "You're not alone," I said before I could stop myself. "Not as long as there's someone willing to fight for you. And I'm sure you have many who would do that." She turned to face me then, and for the first time, I saw her smile. It was small, but it reached her eyes, and for a moment, she seemed to relax, as if the weight had been lifted for just an instant. "Thank you, Sergeant," she whispered, stepping closer to me. "But you are not like the others. I feel as though we are connected in a way I don't understand." My heart raced. There was something in her words, something in her gaze, that made me question everything. The bond between us, the strange connection I felt, was undeniable. But I had no idea what she meant by connected. Was it her royal status, her status as the last hope for her people, or something more? Before I could speak, she surprised me once again. "Sergeant," she began, her voice steady, "I have been told that I must consider a marriage proposal, one that will unite our two peoples, Earth and Zilthar. But the idea of such an arrangement terrifies me." She paused, her voice wavering. "And yet, when I see you, when I talk to you, I find myself wondering if it might not be such a bad thing." I stared at her, dumbfounded, my mind racing to process her words. "Your Highness," I stammered, "I'm not sure what you're asking. You are proposing what?" She looked at me with those piercing eyes, and in that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. "You're taking me as your wife," she said softly, a slight tremor in her voice. "Really?" The words hung in the air between us, heavier than anything I'd ever experienced. Princess Terran, the daughter of the Zilthar Emperor, someone whose people had been one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, someone who carried the weight of an entire empire's future on her shoulders, was standing here, asking me, a soldier, if I was truly going to take her as my wife. My mind raced as I tried to process what she had just said. The weight of her words, their significance, seemed to crush me under its intensity. Was she serious? Was she proposing a political marriage, one born of necessity? Or was it something more? Something personal? My heart hammered in my chest as I looked at her, feeling the reality of the moment slipping through my grasp like sand between my fingers. I had spent so many years training for battle, preparing to face enemies that wanted to kill me. Yet here I was, caught in an entirely different kind of conflict. One of the heart. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I felt a flood of emotions: confusion, uncertainty, excitement, and, oddly, a sense of deep connection. What did she mean by all of this? And why was she even considering such a proposal, especially from someone like me, a soldier who had no royal blood, no diplomatic background? I was just a man doing his job. My eyes searched hers for answers, but there was no trace of jest, no sign of sarcasm in her gaze. She was serious. I don't know what to say. I finally managed, my voice breaking through the fog that had enveloped me. Your Highness, you are the last of your people. You deserve someone who can give you everything, someone who can help you rebuild your empire. I'm just a soldier. I have no right to ask for such an honor. Taryn took a small step closer, her gaze steady but soft, almost searching. That's exactly it, Nathaniel, she said, her voice quieter now, but filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I don't want a man who is just a figurehead, someone who is only interested in political power. I want someone real, someone who will fight beside me not just for the throne, but for what matters most. You have proven to me that you understand what it means to stand up for what's right. You've protected me, guided me when I was at my weakest, and helped me survive when others would have abandoned me. I need someone like you. Her words struck deep, and for a moment, I forgot everything else: the political ramifications, the weight of our respective stations. The truth was that I had never considered the possibility of this situation, and yet here she was, offering me something I had never imagined. I wasn't sure if I could even accept it, if I could be the man she needed. Taryn reached out, gently taking my hand in hers, and the warmth of her touch sent an unexpected wave of calm through me. Her eyes locked with mine, as if searching for something inside me that I hadn't realized was there. I know this is sudden. I know this is unorthodox, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But my people are on the brink of extinction, Nathaniel. The Ascendants have already begun their conquest, and the peace talks will not be enough to save us. We need a strong alliance, one that extends beyond diplomacy, beyond politics. We need a bond, a union that transcends everything. And I believe you are that person. I stood there, motionless, as her words sank in. The weight of the responsibility was almost suffocating. I had never signed up for this. I was a soldier, not a royal consort. But as I looked at her, really looked at her, I saw not just a princess, not just a symbol of her people's fading glory, but a woman. A woman who had been forced to shoulder the impossible, who had been alone for so long. And here she was, asking me, a mere human soldier, to share in her burden. The gravity of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm not sure I'm worthy of this, I whispered, my voice thick with uncertainty. You deserve so much more, Taryn. But she shook her head, her expression softening. You are worthy, Nathaniel, in ways that no one else could be. This is not about titles or power. It's about standing together for what is right, for what must be done. We have a chance, but only if we can combine our strengths, combine our wills. I believe in this connection. In us. Her words wrapped around me like a cloak, and I felt the bond between us deepen, not just as allies, but as something more. The air between us crackled with an undeniable energy, the same energy I had felt when our eyes had first met. She was right, this was not just about politics or power. There was something else here, something that I couldn't explain but could feel in every fiber of my being. All right, I finally said, my voice steady despite the uncertainty in my chest. I don't know where this will lead, or what the future holds. But if you believe this is what we need, then I will stand by you, Taryn. I will fight for you. And I will fight for your people. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips, and she stepped closer, placing her free hand over my chest. That is all I ask, she said softly. That is all I've ever wanted. Chapter 2. The Weight of a Royal Union. In the days that followed, I found myself swept up in the whirlwind of royal politics, though nothing could have truly prepared me for what lay ahead. The proposal, if you could even call it that, had been made, and the decision was set into motion. Taryn, though still technically the princess, began to lean more heavily on me for support, asking me to take a more active role in the defense of her people. It wasn't just about marrying her anymore. It was about becoming a leader in a war that could determine the fate of not just her empire, but the entire galaxy. As I navigated the complexities of her royal court and dealt with the formalities of the marriage, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play here than I fully understood. I had grown closer to Taryn in those brief moments of quiet conversation, when the political mask slipped away and I saw the true woman beneath. She was intelligent, determined, and deeply compassionate, but there was a fire in her, a fire that burned with the need to protect her people, to reclaim her throne and her place in the universe. Yet, there was also a sadness that hung over her, a weight that came with the knowledge that the galaxy had changed, that her people had changed, and that nothing was certain. We spent countless hours discussing strategy, coordinating with military leaders from Earth and beyond, making plans to repel the Ascendant forces. It was clear that the peace talks were little more than a facade, a way to buy time, while the real battle for the galaxy began. The Ascendants were far too powerful, their fleet vast and well-equipped, their military strategy nearly flawless. But Taryn refused to be cowed. She refused to let her people bow before them. "I won't let them take what is mine," she said, her voice fierce and unyielding as she gazed out over the balcony of the royal palace on Azura 9. "I won't let them erase the legacy of the Aelraxi." I stood beside her, watching the distant stars, my mind racing as I took in the enormity of what was at stake. I wasn't a politician or a general. I was a soldier, trained to fight, to follow orders. But this was different. This was personal. This was about protecting a future, a people, and a woman who had unexpectedly become my world. "We'll fight, Taryn," I said softly, my hand resting on her shoulder. "Together, we'll fight." She turned to face me, and for a moment, the weight of the situation seemed to lift as she smiled, the warmth in her eyes a stark contrast to the coldness of the galaxy. "Together," she echoed. But as the days passed, I began to realize that the stakes were higher than I had ever anticipated. The Ascendants were closing in, and we were no longer just trying to survive. We were preparing for a battle that could alter the course of history. Taryn and I stood at the center of it all, bound by more than just duty, more than just the promise of a future. We were bound by blood, by commitment, by love. And as the first battle loomed on the horizon, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The war that was beginning to unfold around us felt like a storm gathering strength. Taryn and I, now bound by a promise and a duty that neither of us had fully expected, had been thrown into a whirlwind of political maneuvering, military strategy, and the looming presence of the Ascendant forces. The peace talks that had originally brought us to Azura 9 had been little more than a diversion, a fragile facade to buy time. But now, with the Ascendant's fleet closing in, the real work began. Taryn's confidence in the face of the crisis was inspiring, but it also came with an unspoken burden. She was no longer just the princess, she was the last hope of her people, a leader whose decisions would shape the future of her civilization. She knew that the odds were stacked against her, that the Ascendants' might was vast, their strategy ruthless. But she also knew something else. If her people were to have a chance at survival, they would need more than just defense. They would need to take the fight to the Ascendants and do so with everything they had. In the days that followed, we worked closely together, planning the next steps. Military leaders from Earth, the remaining factions of the Aelraxi, and various allied species began gathering in a series of strategic meetings. Despite the tension and the uncertainty that filled the air, I couldn't help but be amazed by Taryn's resilience. She had taken the mantle of leadership, and with it, the weight of an entire galaxy's future. She didn't just give orders, she inspired others to follow her. Even the most hardened military commanders, those who had seen war for centuries, found themselves captivated by her drive, her vision, and her unshakable belief that they could win. But despite all the strategic planning and military alliances, something about this whole situation still unsettled me. Here I was just a soldier, a former grunt from Earth suddenly thrust into a role that I had no training for. How could I help her carry the weight of her empire? I was no diplomat, no king. I had no royal blood, no deep knowledge of galactic politics. But what I did have was a sense of duty, a drive to protect those I cared about, and something that had only become clearer in the last few days. A bond with Taryn that went far beyond our shared struggle. There was something between us, a connection I couldn't explain, but I felt it every time she looked at me, every time our eyes met. We had barely spoken about it, this strange bond between us. After the night of the proposal, when she had asked me, so unexpectedly, if I would be her husband, the conversation had shifted. There were no grand declarations, no promises made. But the intimacy of the question, the seriousness in her eyes, had lingered, and in the midst of this galactic war, We both seemed to understand that our futures were now forever intertwined. The alliance between Earth and the Zilthar was important, crucial even, but what had developed between us was personal, something that couldn't be ignored, no matter how high the stakes were. One evening, after a long day of planning and strategizing with the other leaders, Terran and I found ourselves alone in a quiet corner of the palace. The noise of the war council was distant, muffled by the thick walls of the chamber, leaving us in a rare moment of solitude. I found her standing by a large window, looking out over the vast city of Azura. 9, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond. The light from the twin moons bathed her in a soft glow, casting shadows that danced across her face. She looked every bit the regal princess, yet there was something vulnerable about her in that moment, something that made her seem more human than royal. "You've been quiet," I said softly, stepping closer to her. "Are you okay?" She turned to face me, her expression unreadable for a moment, before softening into a faint smile. "I'm just thinking," she replied, her voice distant, yet warm. "This situation is overwhelming. It's hard to believe it's all happening so fast. One moment, we're negotiating, trying to secure peace, and the next, we're preparing for a war that could tear everything apart. It's like the galaxy is holding its breath, waiting for us to fail." I took a deep breath, stepping beside her, my eyes following hers out to the stars. "I don't think it's about failure, Terran," I said. "It's about doing everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. We don't know what the future holds, but if we fight together, we can face whatever comes. You've already brought people together, your people, Earth, and others. We just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time." She turned to me then, her eyes meeting mine with a level of intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "Do you really believe that, Nathaniel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That we can defeat the Ascendants? That we can restore my people, my empire? That a soldier like you, like us, could do something like that?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said firmly. "I believe in you. I believe in us. We're stronger together, and we've got something the Ascendants can't take away: our will. We're not going to let them destroy everything we care about. We'll find a way." For a moment, she didn't speak. She just looked at me, her eyes searching mine, as though she was looking for something she couldn't quite name. Then, slowly, she smiled, her expression softening. "You're right," she said quietly. "I know I can count on you, Nathaniel. I know you'll fight for me, fight for my people, just as I will fight for you. We will make sure that the Ascendants cannot destroy what's left of us." The bond between us seemed to intensify in that moment, a silent promise that we had made, a promise that neither of us could break. It was more than just duty now. We were bound by something deeper, something that neither of us had expected, but something that we both felt in every fiber of our beings. "Together," I whispered, the word feeling like it held the weight of 1,000 possibilities. "Together," she echoed, her voice steady now, filled with the same determination that I had come to admire in her. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it as one." Chapter 3. The Firestorm of War. The days that followed were filled with preparations. The Zilthar were readying their forces, reinforcing the defenses on Azura. 9, while Earth's military fleet began to mobilize in orbit, waiting for the signal to engage. Diplomatic channels remained open, but it was clear that the Ascendants were not interested in peace. They had come for conquest, and they were willing to destroy anyone who stood in their way. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, tactical planning, and defensive operations. Terran's role had shifted even further. She was no longer just a figurehead. She had become a leader in every sense of the word. She made decisions with the confidence of someone who had been born for this, someone who knew that the stakes were higher than ever before. She had made the decision to fight for her people, and she would not back down. As the Ascendant fleet neared, we began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. I spent most of my time with the Earth fleet's commanders, offering advice and learning about the strategy that would be employed in the coming battle. Meanwhile, Terran worked tirelessly with the Zilthar generals, coordinating our forces and ensuring that the alliance between our species remained strong. The bond between Earth and the Zilthar was becoming more than just a tactical necessity. It was turning into a united front that the Ascendants would not be able to ignore. But there was no escaping the looming storm. The Ascendants' fleet was vast, their numbers overwhelming. We could only hope that our combined forces, our shared strength, would be enough to push them back. The night before the battle, I found myself once again with Terran, standing on the balcony of the palace, overlooking the vast expanse of Azura IX's capital. The city was quiet now, as if it too were holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. "We're ready," I said, breaking the silence. Taryn nodded, her expression unreadable. "Ready as we'll ever be," she replied. "But there's something I need to tell you, Nathaniel. Something I should have said earlier, but I couldn't bring myself to." I turned to her, confused. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you have been more to me than just an ally. You've been my strength, my anchor. If I survive this battle, it will be because of you. And I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to face it with you." I didn't know how to respond. The words caught in my throat, and for a moment, all I could do was look at her, the woman who had become so much more than just a princess. She was my equal, my partner, and no matter what came next, we would face it together. The galaxy might be in turmoil, but I had found something in Taryn, a connection, a bond that gave me hope. And as the stars flickered above, we both knew that the battle was about to begin. But no matter the outcome, we were ready. Together. The air on Azura IX was thick with tension as the final hours before battle approached. Every officer, every soldier, every member of the royal court felt the weight of what was coming. The Ascendant fleet was closer than ever, and while our forces were readying their defenses, it was clear that the real fight would take place in the stars above us. The strategy had been devised, a coordinated defense by the combined Earth-Zilthar fleet, with me and Taryn coordinating the ground forces and remaining in close contact with the leadership of both sides. Taryn had assumed a leadership role that had come with a surprising ease, as if she had been born for this. Her determination, her vision, had captured the hearts of the Zilthar generals and the humans alike. The plan was simple but ambitious. We would hit the Ascendants hard at the moment they arrived in the system, hoping to catch them off guard, forcing them to split their forces and buy us time. But time was never on our side, and I knew that our victory would depend on more than just tactics. As we stood on the observation deck that overlooked the massive spaceport, our eyes tracing the paths of incoming ships, I felt an unfamiliar weight settle over me. The calm before the storm was suffocating, and as much as I had trained for moments like this, nothing could have prepared me for the emotional depth of it all. Taryn stood beside me, her stance regal, but her face reflected something that I hadn't seen in her before, a quiet sense of vulnerability. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice softer than usual, carrying an undercurrent of exhaustion and fear. "I didn't ask for this responsibility. I didn't ask for my people to be torn apart, for everything we built to be destroyed." I looked at her, my heart aching. In the time I had spent with her, I had seen the weight of her past, the losses, the betrayals, the longing for a peace that seemed impossible to grasp. But what I hadn't fully understood until now was how deep the scar of her empire's fall truly ran. "You've done everything you could," I said softly. "None of this is your fault. The Ascendants are the ones who've brought this chaos, not you." Her gaze remained fixed on the stars, her eyes distant as if she could already see the fleet arriving in the darkness of space. "But it's my responsibility to fix it, to bring my people back from the brink. I must ensure their survival, Nathaniel." I felt the bond between us deepen in that moment. This was no longer about political alliances, no longer about a simple soldier and a princess bound by duty. This was personal, our futures intertwined, our destinies sealed together by the weight of the galaxy's expectations. There was no turning back. No matter what happened in the coming hours, we had already chosen each other. In this fight, we were a team fighting not just for the Zilthar or Earth, but for each other. The comms crackled to life, a stern voice cutting through the silence. "Sergeant Carter, Princess Taryn, the Ascendant fleet has entered the system. They are deploying forces to land on the surface." I turned to Taryn, her expression hardening in an instant. "It's time," she said, the determination in her voice unmistakable. "Let's do this." Chapter 4. The Final Stand. The battle that unfolded above Azura IX was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The Ascendants came in waves, their massive ships filling the skies, their firepower overwhelming. The Earth-Zilthar fleet responded in kind, but we were outmatched. The Ascendants were a military force unlike anything we had ever seen. Their tactics were ruthless, their ships were powerful, and their numbers were vast. I stood on the command deck of the warship, my eyes glued to the view screens as the battle raged around us. Explosions lit up the sky, and the thrum of weapons fire reverberated through the hall. Our forces fought valiantly, but the ascendants were relentless. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked over to Terran, who stood beside me, her face a mask of focus and resolve. She was no longer the princess who had once been unsure of her role in the galaxy. She was the leader of a dying empire, fighting for its survival, and I was right there beside her. "Sergeant, we need to hold them off long enough to deploy the weapon," Terran said, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. I nodded. "We'll keep them at bay. You just focus on getting the weapon ready. We have to end this." The weapon she spoke of was the last remaining relic of the Aelraxi's power, an ancient device capable of manipulating energy on a scale that was unimaginable. The Aelraxi had used it to power their fleet, to manipulate space and time, but it had been lost in the wake of their fall. Terran had spent days unlocking its potential, and now, she was ready to use it to turn the tide of the battle. But the device required precision, focus, and time-precious resources that we didn't have. If we didn't finish deploying it before the ascendants overwhelmed us, everything would be lost. I grabbed my rifle and turned to the soldiers in the command room. "Prepare for ground assault," I ordered. "We're heading down to the surface to hold the line. The princess needs us." With Terran's signal, I led my team down to the planet's surface, where the battle had already begun. The ascendants had landed, their elite troops clashing with our forces in the streets of Azura IX's capital. The city was under siege, its once beautiful architecture now reduced to rubble. The sound of gunfire and explosions was deafening, but we pressed forward, fighting with everything we had. As I fought, I couldn't help but think about what was at stake. This wasn't just a battle for territory, it was a battle for survival. Terran's people, her empire, were fighting for their future, and I was fighting for her, for us. The thought of losing her, of seeing her dreams crushed, fueled my every move. I fought not just for the galaxy, but for the woman who had given me a reason to believe in something bigger than myself. The ground shook as the ascendants' forces pushed forward, their superior numbers closing in. I could see the desperation in the eyes of our soldiers as they fought, but there was something else in their eyes, too, a flicker of hope. They believed in Terran. They believed in her vision. And I believed in her too. We held the line, pushing back the ascendants with everything we had. The sounds of battle reverberated in my ears, but through it all, I kept my focus on the task at hand. Terran was waiting for us. We had to make sure the weapon was ready. And then, it happened. The skies above us lit up with a blinding light. The weapon was activated, and the energy that erupted from it sent a shockwave through the ground. The Ascendant's fleet shuddered as their ships were torn apart by the sheer force of the energy. For a moment, I thought we had lost, thought that the weapon had failed, but then I saw it. The Ascendant fleet began to break apart, their ships crumbling under the force of the energy surge. They were retreating. "We did it," someone shouted, and I couldn't help but join in the cheer. But as the battle subsided, and the remaining Ascendant forces retreated, I found Terran standing beside me, her face illuminated by the light of the shattered sky. She was breathing heavily, her eyes wild with the intensity of the moment. But there was a spark in them, one I had never seen before. "We did it, Nathaniel," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We saved them." I stepped forward, taking her hands in mine. "We saved you, Terran. And now we rebuild." She smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "Together." And as we stood there, in the midst of the ruins of war, I knew that the galaxy had changed forever. Together, we had turned the tide of battle. Together, we had given her people a chance to rebuild. And together, we would face whatever the future held. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a soldier. I was part of something greater. And with Terran by my side, I knew that we could face anything.